Good evening, everyone. How's everyone doing this evening? Can I get a thumbs up? How are you doing? Yeah, I know some of us have been at the symposium the whole day, so it's been a bit of a long day. But I hope you're excited. I hope you're energized for what promises to be a meaningful and insightful conversation today. So with that, on behalf of the Majurity Trust and Grand Challenges Canada, I just wanted to extend a very warm welcome to everyone here for our special gathering on the sidelines of the Global Mental Health in Asia Symposium that's happening this week. My name is Simran, and I'm delighted to be your MC for this evening. So thank you so much for joining us. So of course, we're all here to explore something that's incredibly relevant, right? How bold ideas can transition into scalable and sustainable solutions in global mental health. So as someone leading the mental well-being pillar here at the Majurity Trust, this is, of course, a very timely topic for both me and my team. And it's a conversation that's gaining momentum, not just in Singapore, but globally, as we all navigate challenges to do with scaling impact. But what does scaling impact really mean, right? So that's what we'll get into today. And judging by the amazing turnout tonight, right, of course, we have representatives from embassies, impact organizations, global organizations, government agencies, and lots more. So it's very, very clear that this dialogue is more important now than ever before. So with that, first I want to say a huge thank you once again to our co-hosts, Grand Challenges Canada, and our partners at Duke NUS and AVPN for making this evening possible. And I'm sure that this will just be the start, the catalyst really, to start many important, rich conversations moving forward. So to kick things off, I'd like to invite Charles, Senior Director of Philanthropy at the Majurity Trust, to give us his welcome address. Charles, please.
Thank you, Simran. Good evening. How's everyone doing? Good? Okay, do me a favor. I'd like everyone to look around the room and connect eyes with someone you have not met before. The eyes need to connect, right? In this fast-paced society, presence is really important. And introduce yourself, where you're from, and tell your new friend about something that sparks joy for you. What is something that sparks joy for you? I may call on some of you to share your responses, so just a little caution. Okay, another 10 seconds. And we are good. Okay, how about let's shout out some responses you've heard from folks in the room. I'm curious, what sparks joy for you? Okay, looks like we are all engaged in the conversation. All right, let's come back to the center. Everyone good? All right, let's hear some responses. What have you heard from the room? Food? Dance? Okay, wonderful. Wine? Awesome. I'm glad we have some tonight. How about from this side of the room? Holiday, of course. And some of you are here on holiday. And for our foreign friends, a warm welcome to Singapore. All right, thank you so much. I hope you got to know somebody new. And it's great to be among old, new friends in the sector. And what a gathering. How many of you were at the symposium this morning? Awesome. Hope everyone had a wonderful, wonderful day. My name is Charles, and I lead the philanthropy team here at Majurity Trust. So let me just give me 5 minutes to share with you a bit more about what we do. You're in Foundry, and Foundry is an initiative that is conceptualized and really something that we dreamt of about how we can bring the social impact ecosystem together. We just launched barely 2 months ago, at the end of November last year. And the whole idea is how do we bring social impact partners and our ecosystem under one roof, right? Because with proximity, there's a lot we can do to unlock resources and collaborate. We just run into each other, can't help but, connect and find ways to work together. So very happy to host all of you. And for those who are visiting Singapore for the first time, extra warm welcome. So Majurity Trust is a Singapore-based philanthropic organization. We work with donors, social media partners, and communities to really think about how can we create a thriving and sustainable Singapore for all. Currently, all we do is Singapore-based, so we're very deeply focused in terms of looking at what are the unseen needs here in Singapore and how can we work with donors to unlock resources to direct much needed help in critical areas. So I think connecting to what's been shared, I'm sure at the symposium, data is a lot about what we think will drive philanthropy and should drive philanthropy. We work with, we have our own insights and strategy team that looks at what are the trends, what are the areas of needs. And youth mental health, which I will share a little more on, is an area of a key focus for us. What we then do is then we create pooled philanthropic funds and platforms, opportunities for donors to come together. Over the last 7 years, we have worked with about 500 donors, aggregating $60 million to be able to deploy to more than 200 social impact partners here in Singapore. So this is what we do. We glean, we give and grow because monetary support takes you quite far, but not all the way. How do we come in with non-monetary non-monetary support as well? And we galvanize, which is what we are doing today. We give in a range of areas. I would say is largely kind of classified into 3 main categories. We have a pool of funds that looks at what we call venture. So we are involved in helping very promising early stage non-profits to go the next distance. How do we help them to build strong foundations to grow? So taking, say, for example, an organization that just established and helping them to, get other donors on board. How do we build good governance, build good organizational capacity to be able to be positioned for scale? And then in field building, we give out larger grants to help to look at what are some models that we should really pilot, test, and grow even further. And youth mental health is a key focus for us. We also work with other partners like the National Council of Social Service, like the Ministry of Health Transformation Office. I know some of the folks are here today too. To be able to catalyze other funding, other resources in the sector and channel that to meaningful causes that we've identified. Needs no introduction. I think, this is a statistic that we are all very concerned about, and many of us in the room have, to a large degree actually dedicated our lives to be able to address this issue. In Singapore, I think much like in other parts of the world as well, suicide is the leading cause of death, right, for kids 10 to 29 years old. And one life lost is too many, right? I think this is the shared purpose that brings us all here together. Back in 2020, we started a pooled fund called the MHIN Asia Blue Star Fund, thanks to a big seed donation from MHIN Asia Group. And really the whole idea is to how do we build a sustainable ecosystem of support for adolescents, for youth, to address the rising mental health concerns in the community that we're seeing. And I'm really glad to see many of our partners here in the room today. Tivasiha Project, Children's Society, Impart, and many others that you will get to meet the rest of the evening. We've now aggregated about $3.4 million, $3.36 million to be able to give out to about 23 grantee partners or grantee charities, social enterprises now, impacting the lives of about 80,000, not just young people, but often also their caregivers and their loved ones. And these are some of our grantee partners. They include, I mentioned some names earlier, but also Samaritans of Singapore, Touch Community Services, and these are key players, key organizations that are really working hand in hand with all of us to be able to address the rising mental health concerns among young people. We commissioned a study 2 years ago, working with a research consultancy called Research for Impact. And it was an attempt at looking at mental health, help-seeking behaviors in the mental health community. What we did was we interviewed a representative sample of parent and child pairs, really trying to understand among young people what are their preferences and what are sort of the dynamics when it comes to navigating the help system, right? We are all in the business of providing help, but it's also important for us to understand how youths want to seek help. and that's what we went out to do. I think the findings are, probably not super surprising for folks in the room in particular, but it has really helped us to really have a deeper understanding, a more nuanced local understanding about where young people are seeking help, and perhaps where the disconnects between young people's preferences and where their parents are coming from or their caregivers are coming from. And we've used that really to spark conversations and also thinking with our partners on the ground, what does adequate holistic support look like? And where are the barriers for seeking help, and how can we actually address some of them? I'd love to share with the folks, all of you, a copy of the study. And also at the same time introduce you to some of the projects that we have supported across the years. So we work with Boys Town. They do a lot of mental health support work too, on an adventure-based program. I think that has opened up ideas around how can we use outdoor nature solutions as one way of engaging young people, right, out of the online world. Children's Society, their partners, Vivian and team, are with us also. And I think where we really are leaning into their expertise is going more upstream, working with younger children, right? The core part and the huge reason why we started is that if you look at the Singapore mental health support landscape, it's safe to say that a lot of programs actually are catered for older youths, right, 15 and above, right? Because working below 15 years old requires a different set of skills. And really we wanted to shine a spotlight on organizations as well as programs that actually can have the potential to grow in that space. And what can we learn from those? We also did a series of funding support for peer-based programs. So we work with an organization called Character Leadership Academy, really thinking about how do we equip young people with wellness and resilient building skills. And also Better Lives, they are the cafe at the back, but they also have a charity arm that does work with a lot of schools, young people, to look at activating peers to support one another. I won't go too much into detail, but again, happy to share some of the insights that we've seen from our outcome-based studies. We looked at aggregated levels of how youth are doing in terms of their attitudes before and after they seek help. How does that look like in terms of stigma? I think it's good to see some of the respondents reporting, better improvements to their mental well-being and so on. And really, I think the whole idea is how can we learn from all that we are doing, being able to not just do outcome evaluation for the sake of it, but how can we actually learn and share and grow together as a community, as a sector. I mean, at the same time as we look at the range of what's happening in our observations, speaking to many of the partners, I think we are very much learning about what's happening within the schools, within the communities, with young people. So I think these are some of the areas that actually we are looking at, focusing, prioritizing support. One area is, parental stigma still exists. Around knowledge gaps, how do we identify and work with parents a little more, especially when it comes to younger adolescents. I think two is, and I've probably said this earlier as well, the need to look at more upstream support for particularly those that are under 14. Because that's a space where we don't see as much support currently. How can we activate and really prioritize funding in that area? And lastly, I think working with schools takes an entire whole set of skills to be able to navigate that space. One of the things that came out of the study was that seeking consent sometimes can be really tricky, right? But it comes to minors, youth, young people, how do you navigate that whole dynamic within schools and with families? So those are some of the key areas that we're learning from our partners, and I think it's areas where, as a philanthropy organization, we can shine a light on and help to spark conversations and solutions around those areas. I'm going to end just 2 more slides. One, I think, just to share about where we're headed to, right? And I think one of the key reasons why we are galvanizing platforms like this is because we are only seeing one part of the community. Even though we have funded quite a number of organizations, there's so much left to do, and so much connections that we can make as an ecosystem of support. So if you're a local partner too, love to see how we can continue conversations. I think the whole idea is how can we shift from just really looking at singular projects, right, to look at what does this look like in a larger system change level. And I think in that connection, it's wonderful to be able to get to know partners like Grand Challenges Canada, and the work of many of you in the space who are thinking about not just running different evidence-driven programs, but also how do we then take a step further, thinking about engaging policymakers, influencing where national conversations are going. So with that, I hope it gives you a bit of a quick overview to Majurity Trust, and we'll be hanging around. You know where to look for us now. Our office is based here, so for those of you who are based in Singapore, do drop by for coffee. But at this point, it brings me great delight and joy to really introduce our speakers and our friends today. We have a sharing from Grand Challenges Canada, a global leader in impact first investing and a champion for mental health innovation. So GCC hosts the Being Initiative, a global effort to create a world where young people feel well and thrive. Their work focuses on research, innovation, and ecosystem building, with a strong emphasis on prevention and promotion. And now to tell us more, I'm really excited to introduce two speakers from GCC. First, we have Sahil, who is the portfolio manager with the Global Health Innovation Team, working closely with their innovators to bring mental health solutions to scale. And joining him is Pushpita, one of GCC's youth advisors and the co-founder of Sehat Jiwa Bahagia, a social enterprise driving mental health, education, and advocacy. They were recently recognized by the World Economic Forum as one of the top youth mental health innovations. So I'm really excited to hear from both of them. Please join me to give them a warm welcome. Sahil, Pushpita.
No, I don't have any slide. This is Sahil. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Pushpita. I'm from Indonesia. I'm here on behalf of Being Initiative as one of their youth advisors. So I hope you are not tired yet talking about youth mental health from this morning, but hear me again. We're talking about youth mental health as a youth advisor. So please bear with me. So I will start this talk with asking you all about when was the first time that you think mental health is a real problem. I don't know about everyone, but most of the time when I talk about this and when I ask about this, they will say like, oh, I think it's when COVID-19 hit. It happened when COVID happened. But for me, it happened like 15 years ago when I became a victim of bullying when I'm still a high school student. And the thing is, because of that experience, I got hospitalized like for 2 weeks. And all of the doctors there do not know what wrongs with me physically. Like all of the doctors come and I don't know what's wrong with you. Like there's nothing wrong with your physical thing, and we just don't know. Maybe you can try to eat or drink or do something that can make your health better. But the thing is, I'm just rely with the IVs that inject to me, and I'm not eating at all for that 2 weeks, and I'm rarely drinking water. But there is, maybe some of you will ask like, oh, so where's the psychologist, where's the psychiatrist, why they do not come at the time? 15 years ago, it's not a thing in my village. It's a small city in Sumatra. And there is no one that talk about mental health. With the religion thing, with the faith thing, it's become taboo. And then what happened after it? It's just 2 weeks. You can just continue your life, right? But the thing is, when I got back from the hospital and go to the school, I feel so different. Like the world is continue evolving, but me just come to that space again, try to adapting with the one that, of course, doing great. And my teachers at the time they ask me like, why Pushpita is always sleeping? They do not want to learn something. They just sleep in their table, and she just sleep in the table and doing like do not pay attention with the thing that happening in the class. But the teachers do not come to me like really ask me personally, but what are you what happening to you? Like, what happened to you? Why do not have that motivation? But there is no one that doing it for me. So the question is the teacher the problem? I don't think so. There's no one that educate them about how to engage, how to help people that struggle with, I don't know, mental health. At that time, I don't know it's mental health. And then, is it my problem? I don't think that's the case, because there is no one that talked to me like having this kind of emotion is valid, is something that understandable. There is no one that talk about it. And then, is it the problem with the psychologist that's not there at that time? We pretty much know that the number of psychologists and psychiatrists even now is very limited. So it's not also the case. So then, but no, the question is it because I'm too sensitive? Because I'm just too young at the time and cannot understand the word? I mean, that's in Indonesia, just now, 1 in 3 youth struggle with mental health. 1 in 20 have mental illness. So what the thing that we can learn from my personal story and the numbers? Speaking about youth mental health is not just about speaking about the one that already get diagnosed. It's also about someone like me that maybe lost motivation to go to school, someone that left behind, someone that labeled as antisocial because I'm really speaking my mind loudly to my peers, my colleague. So youth mental health is not just about providing adequate curative care, but it's also about ensuring the prevalence of mental health do not piling up, do not like become a time bomb that can explode anytime. It's actually about prevention and promotion. So we're really talking about it and take meaningful action toward it. So what do I do? So me, myself, trying to take meaningful action, of course. To help myself, I took my undergraduate study in psychology and then try to understand, that's what's happening. That's why my teacher become like that. That's why my friend do not understand me. That's why I'm struggling and do not have that motivation that I need to have at the time. And then after I graduate, I developed this organization named as Sehat Jiwa. It has been 6 years up to now, and up to now we have reached like 25,000 youth all across Indonesia. And back in 2018, we are developing it just like with 400 Singaporean dollars. And now we are able to work with ministers. We are able to collaborate with global funders. We are recognized as one of youth innovators by Uplink World Economic Forum. But the question for me again, why I'm still stressful? Why I still restless when we talk about mental health? And that's the moment when I go to school, like I have the funding, and then I go to school to talk to the teacher, and I said, hey, can I do this mental health education at your school? Because I think this is important. And they said like, there is no like someone mentally ill here, so why you come here? Like, I'm not asking them to pay it for me. Like, I have the funding. I just want to get access to speak with your student. But that's the thing that happened. And the other time, I'm struggle with these funders that questioning me, why you put someone with lived experience in the panel? Why you are not just put all of the expertise like psychiatrists, psychologists, and then maybe someone that have a lot of power to talk about this? Why you are put the youth, the one with lived experience? And then it's not an easy thing to explain to them, because it's being youth, being someone with lived experience, it's not like some expertise that you can just tell everyone, I have this experience, you need to hear me. So it's not something that's simple for me. And that kind of experience is the thing that led me to, I think I watch every webinar that talking about youth mental health during pandemic. Why? Because I'm just so stressed out, because why people in my country is not, they cannot hear me, like they do not want to invest in prevention, they do not want to give this mental health education. I'm so stressed out about it. And that kind of effort that led me to get to know Being, because at the time I got the information that they are recruiting some youth advisor. And I think even with all of the obstacles that I've mentioned before, being the youth advisor of Being is something that really meaningful for me, because for the very first time, I think that I'm not alone, like in this journey as a youth-led initiative, as someone that trying to take meaningful action toward mental health, because there are so many fellow advisors in Being that also passionately trying to engage, trying to come to the platform with their own point of view, their own perspective about youth mental health and what needs to be done as the whole ecosystem of youth mental health. So the first thing I feel not alone, like it's become like a support group from me personally, like it's so meaningful. And then the second one is I get to know that Being is really trying to engage meaningfully. So most of the time when youth is put in the table, they are just like, oh, we have this youth advisor here. So we got the checkbox being checked. So please let us just continue with our works. But the thing with Being, I think that I also appreciate Sahil and Swat is because I still remembering like every once in a while, we are trying to defining about what is meaningful engagement looks like as for us as a youth advisor. So it's not just like Being trying to influence our thought about the engagement process, but they are really trying to ask our input, trying to engage with us, and trying to give us the platform to grow. And the thing that maybe I would like to share is the two things that always come out when I discuss with my fellow advisor is there's two things that can ensure meaningful engagement in youth. The first one is about accountability. We are really care about how our feedback is being taken, not like all of our feedback need to be accepted, but we want to know, we give this feedback and we are struggling back at our home because it's not happening in my country. So if I give this you feedback, what is the struggle? What is the obstacle so that make it not happening? So that's the thing that we would like to understand. And the second one is respect. Like I said before, we need to be seen as one of the experts of the panel. And then I think that's the thing that I should be grateful to become a youth advisor of Being. And the last piece of thing that I would like to share is, if one youth like me can try, I believe all of us here with the power within all of you, the government, the funders, we can like do a lot to have to get the meaningful action around youth mental health. Can you imagine what kind of change that can happening? What kind of change that you would like to see around the youth mental health ecosystem? We are talking about a lot about holistic approach, about life event approach, something like that. But how we are doing it, like in our day-to-day work, and for me myself personally, the thing that I would like to see is I do not want many more youth spend 10 years of their life just to understand that it is okay to not be okay. That is okay if you are struggling with some emotional thing within yourself, and that's okay to reach for help. I think that's the thing that still fuel me to continue my work. And the last question that I would like to ask is, how do you plan to fill in the gap? Because we see a lot of initiative. They work in silos most of the time. Like we are doing the same thing. Like if you see the innovators thing, okay, this one is also kind of similar but different. And I think that's the thing that we need to discuss also, how we can work hand in hand to ensure youth mental health is not just achieve awareness level, but translated into sustainable investment that led to better mental health condition of our youth. And last but not the least, there is no youth mental health without the youth itself. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This is really truly inspiring. Thank you so much, Puspita. First of all, I would extend a warm welcome to all of you on behalf of Grand Challenges Canada. And thank you so much from Majurity Trust for sharing this lovely space. And thank you so much, everyone. Like after this tiring one full day, you are here to still discuss about mental health. And that shows the passion of all of us. So I'm going to talk briefly about Grand Challenges Canada. I'm sure you're aware of it, but very quickly about Grand Challenges Canada. We are one of the largest impact investors in Canada, and we have been funded by Government of Canada, but by other donors too. And since 2010, we have invested around 1,700 projects, the innovative projects, and in the areas of health, nutrition, indigenous innovations, and especially we have reached unserved and underserved communities. Our mission is very simple, that we believe that innovations can impact millions of lives. And we also believe that we can make meaningful change in those lives just because of innovations. And we have done so in the last 14 years with 1,700 projects by reaching by saving 86,000 lives. So this is the chart. Like we have funded around 100 low and middle income countries. So how do we measure our impact? So our measuring impact is very simple. We focus on three things. One is lives improved, lives saved, and lives reached. But while saying so, our evaluation metrics are very rigorous. And we are very careful and conservative when we talk about how do we attribute our impact, whether we have really saved our lives, whether we have really reached those lives. And then, like I said, I think in the last 14 years, we have reached almost 18 million people. We have improved almost 26 million lives. And the life saved is about 86,000. I'm going to talk about how do we fund? What is our funding mechanism? So we have a graduated funding mechanism, which means we give powers to innovators so that they could fail fast, they could iterate, and they could also redefine the models. What we have understood is there's a huge gap. If you look at most of the grants, they are focused on proof of concepts. And if you look at the impact investors, they are focused on the proven innovations. But what about those innovators who are at this stage, who are at early stage, who do not have funding? I think this is where GCC fills that gap. And we have a very an innovative framework wherein we focus on 4 different stages. The first stage is about once an innovator have proven that they have demonstrated impact, then we request or we ask that innovator to redefine their business plan, what scale and sustainability plans looks like, what do they think about partnerships. And in the TTS2, in the level 2, we look at how do we strengthen those partnerships, can we validate those plans? But the important thing at TTS2 is that we want to understand whether there is a still demand for that innovation. And then the third level is about implementation of those innovations at a scale. And scale could be anything. The scale could be a province, the stage could be at, the scale could be a state. So it could be anything, but the point here is we iterate, we redefine models at every stage. And the fourth one is where we go global, where we have funded innovations like Friendship Bench. We have also funded Strong Minds in Uganda. We have Waves for Change in South Africa. So those kind of innovations that we have funded, and it comes at stage 4. Okay, so I'm going to talk about mental health. I think, so this is an important one. I'm going to take you through the journey of mental health in GCC. So GCC is one of the largest funders, not only in the space of impact investing, but also in the space of mental health. We have been funding mental health since 2010, when no one was talking about mental health. But then we moved through, and then in 2019, we shifted our focus from a lifespan approach to an approach towards young people's 10 to 24 years of age group. And this is done through our learnings with the last 8 to 9 years, where we could make more impact, and the impactful age was 10 to 24. But then we moved on. In 2022, we realized there's a huge gap in funding in the space of prevention. And that's why in 2022, Foundation Botner Global Affairs Canada, Government of UK, we all came together and discussed what we could do to focus on prevention. And then we launched our funding, then we launched a very ambitious Being Initiative program, which is a $100 million initiative. But then the point was, how do we focus on, how do we manage our funding calls? Then we decided, let us ask from the local stakeholders. Let us go to them and ask, what do they think are the priorities for youth mental health? What do they think about prevention, rather than we telling them, like, you could do this, let us ask from them. So for full 1 year, we focused on scoping analysis. We met local stakeholders. We understood what are the local drivers that impact youth mental health, and they came out with the top 10 drivers, and then we asked them to rank those drivers in the order of priority, and we came out with an extensive list of those drivers. For instance, like in Vietnam, we focus on family functioning. In India and Pakistan, we are also focusing on family functioning, but there's a huge difference. In family functioning, when we say about, in India, is about communication amongst parents, but in Vietnam and in Pakistan, it is about strict parenting styles. And then in Indonesia, it is about adverse childhood experiences. So each of our 12 focus countries have unique drivers that we have been focusing on. This makes this Being initiative a very innovative one. And then we have proof of concepts. Then we have these three kind of funding. The proof of concepts and transition to scale, I think we have been already doing this funding for the last 12 years, but we have added another stream called ecosystem catalyst grants. And this is based on our learning. We have learned that if we do not resolve systemic barriers, we are not able to support those innovations. And those systemic barriers are like lackluster policies, fragmented funding. So how do we manage? How do we ensure that there's an enabling environment for that ecosystem, for those innovators who could then scale those innovations? And then what we have also done is that we have our learning and support provider. We not only provide financial support, but we also provide technical support to those innovators. And we have Orygen, who have been doing an amazing work. But the point here is that with the ecosystem Catalyst Grant, we've also learned that we cannot do everything alone. So we cannot do everything. So it is important that we should utilize, or we should leverage the work that we have already done so far. For instance, we have done landscaping, and if you would like to utilize that information, I think we should leverage that information that is already with GCC, and we could share that. And that is an enriched information. The idea of this conversation, the idea of having this group, is to ensure, like, how do we avoid duplication? How do we leverage on each other's expertise? For instance, like the landscaping report that we have done so far. We have done proof of concepts. We know what is working and what is not. How do we utilize that information? You could de-risk your own investments by utilizing that information that we had with us in terms of those proof of concepts. The other thing we could also do, and this is again an upfront ideas, for instance, like we have been investing in Vietnam, Indonesia, India, and Pakistan. We have been receiving a lot of applications for proof of concept, but we haven't received many applications or good quality applications for transition to scale. So my call to action to all of you is like, how do we, can we work together on this? Do you have an idea that we could co-fund together? So these are all upstream ideas that we could just focus on. And that's why I think it is important that we should all come together. As someone said, like some of our individual efforts are bigger than all of us. So it is important that we should focus on that ecosystem building exercise. And the other end, I would stop there, is about Orygen, our learning and support provider. So they have already created those regional hubs in those countries. They've been already providing their technical support to those organizations. So how we could leverage that technical support, how we could leverage that capacities that already there in those countries and we are happy to discuss with you. So we have, I'm here for the next 2 days too. So happy to discuss further with you that how do we collaborate, how do we work together on this, and how do we make sure that we work on youth mental health and we work for the young people's mental health and well-being. I'll pause here, but happy to discuss and happy to take any question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Sahil and Pushpita. Now we're going to move into our exciting fireside chat. I'm sure there's lots of food for thought that you have at the moment. There's calls for action. So we're going to really move into a space where we can hear firsthand from organizations that are driving impact in the mental health space on the ground, both globally and here in Singapore. So I'm sure that you'll look up our speakers after this conversation, but allow me to introduce them to you first. First, we have Nataya, Programs and Partnership Manager at Orygen Global, who Sahil mentioned as well, which is the world's largest research and non-governmental organization dedicated to youth mental health innovation. She's been deeply involved in shaping youth mental health initiatives worldwide, and beyond her work at Orygen, she also sits on the World Health Organization's Youth Council. And then, of course, joining us, we have Naresh, who I'm sure many in the room are familiar with as well, co-founder and executive director of Impart, a Singapore-based organization, obviously working at the intersection of youth mental health, education, and employability. With a background in youth rehabilitation, he's pioneered community-based care models and continues to strengthen accessible preventative mental health support for young people. So I'm very excited for this conversation. And as your MC today as well, I also have the great privilege of moderating this conversation. So let's jump right into it. I'm conscious of time, so we're gonna get right to the heart of the topic really today, right? And which is scaling is a big part of this conversation. And of course, both Orygen and Impart have been deeply involved in scaling mental health solutions. But actually the word scaling means different things in different contexts for different work. So maybe we can just start with both of you kind of sharing your perspectives on what does scaling mean in the context of your work. Maybe Naresh, we can start off with you. Yeah.
Okay, I think that there are a lot of work that needs to be done among young people, right? But I think it's also about looking at what kind of work that really fits certain groups of people, and how can we work together some interventions that can affect a group of young people, right? A lot of the work that Impart has been doing is a bit of like one-to-one befriending and providing them psychosocial support. But when we want to look at preventive work, you want to see whether you can scale it up to a level where you can meet a group of young people and then deliver the intervention. So I think how you scale can look very different whether you are targeting individuals or targeting groups of people.
On the back of that, I think scaling is not about the wow. It's not about the big and shiny coming up newest thing, but rather it's about the now. What are people already doing to meet local needs, local communities, local young people? And I have the privilege of being able to strengthen and support so many occurring in our region and beyond. And I think that is really the key, that rather than looking beyond, looking at home, looking within communities, and that's really where scaling happens.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is innovation and scaling is not just innovation for innovation's sake, right? And scale is not just large numbers for the sake of large numbers, but what is the context, what is the work telling us what's needed? So maybe we can dive into a bit of both of your experiences, right? In terms of scaling mental health innovations locally and globally. What are some of the challenges that you faced in making innovation sustainable? And as you reflect on those experiences, how could partners or funders have supported you better in that journey as well?
All right. So I think, as I said, Impart started off by giving one-to-one support for many of the young people who are in mental health crisis. So we have one or two volunteers who go out to the young person and give them psychosocial support. And when we started to do that, the referrals started to just stream in, right? After that, it was a waterfall of referrals. And then the question was, okay, we have this intervention plan where we are getting volunteers to be grouped with young individuals in the community. But later, we then had to explore other ways of like trying to look at how do you solve this issue. Right now, we are having more and more young people being referred. So that became a problem in a good way, I suppose. Then the question for us was, can we build systems of care for these individuals who can come into groups? Right? And then our mindset kind of shifted to see how do you then create groups that can hold spaces for these young individuals, right? So as we did the work, we grew in terms of like just thinking about how can we create ecosystems of care. And I think right now we have a lot of groups and that does sports and group therapy. And then all of a sudden there are people coming to me and telling me, hey Naresh, you do all this like boxing, soccer, Muay Thai, sounds like very rough sports that you are doing with the young people. What about arts? What about dance? What about music? Where is the softer side to things, right? And then we start to look at those work and see how do you introduce music therapy into the work, right? So in that sense, we are just kind of scaling as we are going, right? And also really listening to the young people is a very important thing because all our programs are co-created with young people.
I think some of the key challenges, we have, as I mentioned, we support about 50 different mental health innovations. So we get to see sort of across the incredible work that is happening. I think there are sort of 3 key challenges. I think the first, as Naresh just mentioned, is the sense that sometimes as funders, when you're trying to put like a square peg through a round hole, where there might be particular needs that you've identified or that have been identified, where you're trying to find innovations that meet that need. Whereas often for implementers and providers, actually it's so much more fluid and flexible than that. There might be parts of the work that they do that meet that need, but maybe not the whole thing. And so I think that's a call to try and to be flexible and to understand the innovator and their journey and to support them to refine and redefine what they do already that works really well. I think secondly, I think it's the pressure to scale when they haven't quite gotten what they're doing quite right. And I think that part of that is that we do operate in mental health within a really complex ecosystem with complex interventions where we're operating within informal and formal structures of care. We're interfacing with the system. In the Asia Pacific, as we know, there isn't a robust specific youth mental health policy legislative environment. So it means that sometimes it takes time to get things right. And I think being able to ensure that innovators have gotten things right before they scale. We have an innovator in Laos that we've been supporting on their journey for about 5 years. And when they started, they're just a student, a volunteer during COVID, and it was just them. Now they have a team of over 30 volunteers. They've reached over 1,500 young people. They run a wellness festival. They have peer support, but it didn't happen overnight. And I think part of that is going on the journey for, sometimes it takes, we're talking 10 years here to see change, to see return, to see their community uptake the needs that they're addressing. So I think those are the 2 things. And then the last, I think, challenge to scale is that particularly with youth mental health, we're thinking about young people leading innovations that are also going through transitions themselves. Maybe they're studying. Maybe it's their first job. Maybe they're early career professionals. And to go back to when you were within that age group, there are so many challenges, life and otherwise, coming your way. And also you're developing your skill set as well. And that's where I think sort of non-financial support, being able to strengthen technically the work that they're doing and be allies in creating connections, creating partnerships is so integral, because that can be a huge barrier to scale when you have other things to think about as well.
Yeah, lots to think about there, I think, right? Sometimes scale, what I'm hearing from Naresh as well, is not always planned for, right? It's organic. We're seeing how community responds. We see the iterations that we need to make. And what I'm hearing from Nataya as well is the call to action for flexibility, right? Understanding whether it's of the founders themselves or of the work and how it kind of takes to community. Something we've talked about as we've kind of been preparing for this discussion, and I think has come up in small conversations, is failure, right? And sometimes failure is a bad word. But I wanted to just kind of unpack that a little bit. What do you see as the role of failure? Is it an important part of the scaling process? How can we best learn from failure, right? As we kind of meaningfully support folks who want to scale the work that they do. Nataya, maybe we can jump off of what you just shared as well.
Sure. I was just pondering this and thinking about failure and thinking about Orygen and in the work that we've done globally as well. In 2019 to sort of 2018, 19, 20, we did a project with the World Economic Forum around developing a global model of care. And we produced a publication that has principles for around a global model of care. They include being youth-specific, easy, affordable access, early intervention and promotion, being youth-centred, and acknowledging context, and being family-centred, and a few others as well. We consulted probably about over 500 people, over like nearly 1,000 young people through the project. That took sort of 18 to 24 months. And at the end, our thought was, we found these global universal principles. So let's start to sort of embed them into services. Let's start to develop these services that support these different principles. But what we found actually is that that's not going to work, because although you have these great principles, actually context is king, and that actually rather working, so what we did is rather pivot and think about how do we partner with local champions, those already embedding those models within their existing work that they've established on the ground, and be able to strengthen and support that. And so I think, although that was unexpected, I think being able to do that informed our role as like a facilitator and connector, and being able to sort of establish where the gaps are globally, rather than just moving forward with these principles.
So failure for us. So when we first failed quite badly, I think, was when we had like the needs evaluated with the young people, and everybody said, okay, they have a specific need, and we're like, all right, I think we can serve this need, right? And then we had a funder who came along who wanted to fund us for that piece of work, the new work, and what we were already doing. What then happened was that when we started to do something a little bit larger than what we planned to do at first, and we scaled too quickly, in that moment, we dropped the ball that we were supposed to be really good at, and we didn't manage to accomplish what was the new objective set by the funders. So that made us realize that sometimes we become too ambitious when we get small wins, and we don't understand that the small wins need to amount to something bigger before you can take the step to take the step to take the next step, if I can put it that way, right? And if we just jump and take a leap of faith, a lot of times it can be quite disastrous, meaning to say that I didn't know that stressed my worker. And he was himself then managing some mental health stress, right? And so I think failure can mean a lot, and that was one great lesson that I realized that we can actually disrupt the whole ecosystem of work, plus the people who are doing the work alongside with us. And so at what cost do we want to scale? At what cost am I going to take do a new work? Yeah,
absolutely. Which also takes us back to actually what is the point of scaling to begin with, right? If we're just scaling for the sake of numbers, then the downstream implications are multifold when you're working in a very human space. But if you're actually kind of scaling for the depth of the impact, then maybe those things that we take into account a little bit more, right? And for those of us interested in scaling work, we often hear things like seed funding, grow funding, right? Philanthropic capital as risk capital, but actually what does that meaningful support look like, right? Like Nataya talked about enabling, technical support, building partnerships, and actually even just the implications of what we expect of our partner organizations, on the workforce within the team and how that actually might enable or actually disable the work that we really want to achieve, right? So kind of interrogating some of these conversations a bit more. I have one more question before we open up for audience questions. So please, get your questions ready. But Naresh, you kind of pointed to this a little bit earlier on. Both you kind of co-create solutions, right, with the youth that you work with, and that's something Orygen does as well. So maybe you can share with us a little bit about how your organizations meaningfully include youth with lived experiences in mental health innovation work, and maybe comment a little bit about why, right? Just beyond the sake of inclusion, what is the value that you see that brings to the work that you do? And maybe Nataya, we can start with you to kick us off.
Sure. So Orygen has been doing youth participation for about 15 years, a really, really long time in mental health. And I think one thing is that, we're still learning. We still haven't gotten it right. I think we've made a lot of mistakes. And I think that's really important in this picture, that it is messy. But I think what are the benefits, which is, why do we do it? And I think, as Pushpita mentioned, that young people are closest to the needs in their communities, in their place, in their space. And that means that their ideas, that their input, that the way that they want to shape your organisation, shape your funding call, shape the decisions that I make, will be relevant to your end user, to the person you're trying to reach, to the impact you're trying to intend to have. Does that mean that for everyone's context, that everyone should have youth advisors? Not necessarily. I think youth participation is not one size fits all. And I think that you need to think about in your organisation, what are we ready to do? What are we ready for? And my encouragement to you would be to go slow and to grow. Perhaps you've never heard from the youth perspective or whoever you're trying to target. Maybe you've never heard that perspective. Open yourself up to that. Perhaps you're open to having young people consult on a document. Open yourself up to that and continue to grow towards having young people partner in the decisions and the work you do. But it doesn't mean you have to start there as well. Rather, I think there are lots of ways that we can continue to grow in meaningful engagement, but it doesn't have to start at this endpoint. It's really not a one-size-fits-all. But I think my question is, should you do it? Yes. Can you do it? Yes. And I think if you can't answer yes and yes to those questions, I think it's a good point to start reflecting how.
Yeah, so I like what Pushpita said earlier. There is no youth mental health without the youth, right? And so I think it's important to get them to participate in the whole intervention process. We feel that their feedback is really important, and how their feedback is used has to be calibrated. I think it has to come with the wisdom of people who have journeyed with young people too, right? Because sometimes youth can be really opinionated too, right? And we can say there are also times that they don't know what really works for them, hence they are the youths, right? But we want to value them, allow them to have that autonomy, to have the say, because then they have the ownership in the whole process, right? And I think that is the important value about youth participation. And for us as an organization, we value that, and we continue to strive to work our mental health innovations and the work that we do with the participation of the young people.
Absolutely. So I think a good time to transition into audience questions. If you have a question, please put your hand up. My colleague Gunjali will pass you a mic so we can all hear you. Does anyone have any questions for Naresh and Nataya? Over here, Florence.
Yeah, hi, thank you for the insightful comments. And I have a question about meaningful youth engagements. Can you share with us how does it look like concretely in your organizations?
participant or volunteers? Okay, so I think one of the ways that we feel young people can be empowered is when they too become part of the ecosystem of care, because many a times they are on the receiving end of things, right? And I think when we see young people, we see them as partners together with us, and when we get them on board as so there's different levels they can be involved with us. We always start them off as a community befriender, where in the community we are able to mold them, we are able to work with them, because sometimes they may not be a right fit. And sometimes their mental health can deteriorate. These are real facts when you are working with young people. But meaningful engagement is when they can be a contributor to another person's ecosystem of care, right? And when they are also improving on their own mental health as they are giving. I feel like that is one of the biggest things that we do, right? Because education alone doesn't change someone, right? I think it's when you work on the education, when you apply the education, when you are implementing it, that's when you receive more. That's when you learn a lot more. And that's why we are called Impart, because we want to impart the skills so that the university student or our youths can impart to someone else, right? And that's when the highest learning happens. So I think in one sense, that's how I would answer the question.
And maybe I'll share two examples from our organisation. One is that young people sit on every recruitment panel that we run for positions at our organisation, and are involved in the decision making for that position. And then the second is around we have a youth advisory group that advise to the strategy of our organisation and a young person that sits on the board. But perhaps a good example of sort of youth partnership is that when I was younger than I am now, actually within the age group, on the back of all the consultations we ran for the World Economic Forum project, we heard that young people were doing incredible work but didn't feel supported. And one of the things that we did, myself and the other youth advisors, put together a proposal around developing an advocacy fellowship to support those young people. And then through the partnership with Orygen, who provided the funding, we were able to lead, develop and design that fellowship, of which Glenn and also Trisha were part of, actually. So I think that's also an example of sort of that highest level. And again, back to what I said, that every form of youth participation is a great place to start.
And I think important reminders that even as we engage youth, right, how do we scaffold the process so it's meaningful to them? And also remember that there's an ecosystem of care that we also owe them, right, even as they're informing how we might provide care. Any other questions for our price? Yes, Asher over there. Perfect. Thank you, Shania.
Well, thank you so much for sharing about the different services and how you've done stuff. I was really interested to find out a little bit more about how you identify who sits on your youth advisory panels or youth advisory groups. How do you find these people? How do you ensure that what they're bringing to the panel is of quality, and that they are not maybe taking on a very biased approach?
Maybe I'll quickly throw that back to, I think, the reframe of that, as well as how is your organisation ensuring that their view is integrated into the decisions that are being made when their perspective is provided as well. That's probably my answer.
Okay, that was a very quick answer, but I think, sometimes thinking about how our organization is, right, and how can we be malleable to those that we want to include. And of course, Naresh also pointed earlier that sometimes they're not the right fit, right? So how do we still equip in a meaningful way, even if they're not, joining with us in the further way? Anyone else has questions for us? Yes, over here. And one more. We'll take both questions at the same time, and then we can group the answers together.
Hi, thank you. So when we talk about youth mental health, of course, we want to engage as many youth as possible. But since they are minors, they are still under guardians. So have you ever experienced any resistance from the said guardians, like parents or the school systems? And if so, how do you manage to convince them and shift their resistance to acceptance when we talk about youth collaboration? Thank you.
Yeah, so I think that's a big one even in Singapore, right? Which is one of the reasons why we don't blatantly call ourselves a mental health organization, because the minute you call yourself that, the parents will just ask you to, that's the door, right? And I think that one of the things that we have done is we try to say mental health without saying it. I think that's one of the very important things that we have learned, right? When we tell parents, hey, we are going to teach them coping skills for their exams. Don't you want them to do well for exams? That's a definite, right? I mean, parents will love that, right? So then we kind of slip it in that way where we can go like a Trojan horse to these young people, right? Because we want to be able to get them the mental health service, and we don't want to get them to resist us, right? Because a lot of times when they resist us, it's because we gave them the reason to. And I think it's really important to see it that way. And so phrasing and how do you carefully even word the intervention is important. Right? Yeah, we know at the back end, oh, this is a mental health service, right? But I think for a parent, we want to be able to tell them what we are doing, right? We're not trying to deceive them that this is, like we're not trying to be deceptional about it.
Yeah, and I think that's something important to think about when we think about access, right? We always talk about access to mental health services, and there was a speaker for those of us at the symposium today who was talking about making sure we use the language of the communities that we're serving rather than just saying mental health because for the sake of mental health, right? So I think in different contexts it could be a heart and mind problem, for example, that people refer to mental health issues as that, right? Especially in our region, it appears much more somatic than it does cognitive, right? So kind of taking these contextual realities into play, and the language that we use has a huge impact. I think we have another question up front here.
Hi, thanks so much for sharing so far. It's really insightful. I had a question about your approach to evaluating youth partnership. So I think for a lot of us here, there's intrinsic value in partnering with young people. But for me, my experience in Singapore is that it's challenging to advocate to stakeholders the outcomes of these programs with partner with young people. For example, I helped to run a program called the MHIN Youth Fellowship together with Singi. So in our first year, we managed to push out a product which was the MHIN Youth program. But subsequently in our later years, we felt that, we're investing a lot of money into something, youth advocacy, but then that wasn't really a very appealing product or end goal for like a lot of the decision makers we are appealing to. So I was wondering about your approach towards, advocating for youth partnership towards decision makers who might not value the intrinsic worth of that. Yeah, and any advice in general? Yeah.
Sure. I think for us, a key principle. Well, I think two things. First, I think you need to model it within your own organisation, because I think that you can, that being able to see the impact within your own organisation by implementing youth participation is a case study in itself to be able to share the impact of the work that you're doing. For example, like GCC with their being a youth advisory group, or with the youth fellowship that we run, for example. I think the second is that we should be evaluating the participation of young people and whether it's meaningful. And by doing so, being able to demonstrate the impact of the work that it's had. So, for example, how I was speaking to a research fellow the other day about their youth advisory group, and they shared about how young people shifted their agenda in terms of the project bounds and how that increased the reach that they've had in the community and in terms of recruitment. So I think we can demonstrate links between the input of young people and the impact that it's having. But it is about generating that narrative and doing it for yourself to ensure that as organisations we're advocates for that too.
I'm not too sure this answer will be a complicated one or an easy one, right? Do you understand the phrase theory of change? Yeah, so I think theory of change is like how do you get to the change at the end of the day using some interventions, right? So I think if you want to do something like that, it's not about having a theory of change alone, but it's about having to understand what's the theory of change for your organization and how this intervention or this strategy is embedded within the bigger theory of change that you are trying to achieve. As I said, it can be kind of complicated. Yeah.
started with theory of change and then it went to interrogating our organizational principles. But I think an important consideration, right? Like what's in the DNA of the work that we're doing in the organizations we're in. I know we're running short of time, so I will transition into kind of closing this part off. But thank you so much, Nourish and Nataya, for your sharing. Can you please join me in just giving them a round of applause? So as we move into the rest of the evening, I just want to encourage each one of us to reflect on how we can work together to amplify the work that's happening on the ground, whether it's through partnerships, knowledge sharing, collaborations. I hope this has been a space to really spark some meaningful conversations. So please don't hesitate to use the rest of the evening to really connect with one another. We're welcoming you to obviously continue having some drinks and bites that are provided by our friends at Better Barista at the back of the room. There's also a booth on this side over here by the Mental Health Innovation Network. And in the middle of the room, you'll see the poster that features the work of our Blue Star partners that was also presented at the symposium earlier today. So lots of spaces to engage, lots of spaces to connect. And I hope we make the best of this evening to build on the connections and continue to drive impact together. So with that, thank you so much for being here. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening with us.